Welcome to the Andy Staples Show. We're here in Atlanta in a hotel room that looks like any other. If I turn the camera around, you might see Mercedes-Benz Stadium, but you also might see a reflection back into the same
and
picture.
A crane and a thin layer of smog. Is
You're
that
seeing.
smog or clouds?
I believe that's smog. This is a big city with a lot of traffic.
We're not in Shanghai, but Atlanta does have its share of pollution, I guess.
Tons of traffic.
Yes.
Seth Emerson, our Georgia beat writer, he lives in Athens where there's not much traffic, and every once in a while has to drive the 60 or so miles over here and experience big city living.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're talking Georgia. We're talking Ohio State. Cameron Teague, our Ohio State beat writer from The Athletic, is going to be on later today. This is our Peach Bowl preview extravaganza. Seth and I were just talking about Stetson Bennett because we just did interviews with Georgia players. It was the Georgia offense today and the Ohio State defense. And Stetson Bennett, if you haven't heard him interviewed, go seek out some clips. He's very interesting. He's more introspective than most athletes you hear interviewed. And he had this, just something incredible that I feel like I need to stitch it into a pillow or something. It was something I didn't learn until my 30s. And to hear him say it the way he said it, I was like, that is so obvious, but it took me most of my life to figure it out. And we were talking about goals and what you have to do once you've reached one, and how do you repeat and that sort of thing. And I asked him, when you win a national title, when you reach a goal that you've been chasing, do you just figure out, hey, life goes on after that? And he talked about how he was sitting in a math class 2 weeks after winning the national title, and it dawned on him. He's like, oh, crap, which is the exact words he used. This doesn't change anything. I still have to live the rest of my life, and I still have to get better every day and all. And he said, thank God I learned that now and not after working a job for 40 years. And he said, he was trying to imagine if he worked a job for 40 years and the goal was always retirement and they're going to move to the beach or whatever it is. And then you get there and you're 63 years old and you're like, oh, wait, no, that's not it. It doesn't end. It all just keeps going. Such a valuable lesson in life. And it was like, to hear him encapsulated in 30 seconds, like, dude, that took me probably 35 years to figure out.
I'm not sure I've figured that out myself, but it ties into this Georgia football program as a whole.
Yeah.
Because I having covered this team for a while, and I have not been a Georgia person for 41 years. I grew up elsewhere, but I parachuted in here in 2002. At that point, they were 21 years removed from winning it all. And every year, the pain increased.
Yeah.
Especially as you watch Auburn win. Tennessee had won in the 90s. Alabama does its thing. LSU.
Florida won 3.
Yeah. Florida especially. And so the pain is increasing. And then Indianapolis happens. And Georgia finally wins it in January. And it was almost probably a bad comparison to make, but whatever. The end of Zero Dark 30, when the Jessica Chastain character cries in the shuttle because she's done it. They got bin Laden, and now what? I think that's why she's crying, or it is a release in general. But you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, life goes on. You may have worked toward this whole thing.
Exactly.
And you're talking about the Georgia program in general, which was working toward that national title for 40 years.
Yeah.
And got there. And what was the next thing? Well, you're supposed to turn around and do it again. And that's a lot of this. You're going to be listening to this in podcast form on Thursday. So I'll have a column out about standards and about what daily life must be like to win a national title, because Ohio State's in a unique position here where I find it weird hearing Ohio State people asking, are we going to have a chance in this game? Like,
yeah,
you're supposed to be on par with Georgia. Like, that's the whole point. And I think that's why the Ryan Day situation fascinates me, because they just lost to Michigan twice in a row. There's sort of an existential crisis going on that can be erased by beating Georgia. Of course, then they'd probably have to play Michigan again.
A program that hasn't, by God, won the national championship in 9 years.
Right.
Whereas the fast to close that thought and then jump on your thought, when Georgia won it, and got that monkey off its back. It was almost like, this year, who cares? And yet Stetson Bennett comes back when he didn't have to. And they're back here.
Well,
and
it turns out Kirby Smart's been building it the same way his old boss in Tuscaloosa built it, where it's supposed to sustain.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to cycle up to a great year. It's supposed to be a great year every year.
Well, they were the Red Sox of college football, and the Red Sox didn't win it again in 2005, but they won it again in 2007. They won it again in 2013. They won it.
They weren't the lovable losers anymore. Yeah,
they got there and they sustained, and that's what Georgia is doing. But when you look at Ohio State, I think, and I've had Ohio State writers ask me, like, do you think Ohio State has a chance, or is Georgia going to roll here? And I'm like, yes, Ohio State has a chance, because game recognizes game.
Yes.
What is Georgia good at? What is there? There's a lot of reasons that they are in this position, but what is the main reason? Recruiting. Who is the one non-SEC program that recruits at Georgia's level?
Ohio
Close
State.
to it. And that's why that was the last team that Kirby Smart and company wanted to draw in the playoff.
Well, and that's what I find so interesting, because this game may tell us a lot about how Ryan Day runs his program, because I spent a lot of the time with the Georgia players asking them what practices are like. And I asked the Ohio State players some similar questions. It was very interesting to me hearing the phrase Bloody Tuesday come out of Kenny McIntosh's mouth, because the first time I heard that phrase, and it is a pretty common phrase in football, your Tuesday practices in college are your most physical, or usually are. But the first time I heard that phrase used in connection with a game week Tuesday practice was when Urban Meyer came to Florida and I was covering the Gators, and he used that phrase. That's what he called Tuesdays. And who built this Ohio State program as it's currently constructed? Urban Meyer. But it's not the same. They don't act like that. They don't play like that anymore. And that's the part. They got to find that.
Did they get too dependent on their talent and their speed and athleticism and using their offense to basically outscore everybody?
I don't even know if it's that. I think it's a philosophical thing. And I've been harping on this with regard to Lincoln Riley and USC for a long time.
And that seems like that is a real endemic problem.
Since he's been in Oklahoma. Whether at Oklahoma or USC, it's the same team. The same failures happen for the same reasons. Philosophically, you don't prepare to be hitting at the end of the season, whereas Alabama and Georgia always do. They don't change anything. They keep playing the same way. Like their week 1 practice and their week 12 practice, the schedule's the same.
Matt Luke told me, the retired Georgia O-line coach, he told me that the proudest moment for him was watching Kirby celebrate after the national championship, because of how much they had been criticized after losing to Alabama in the SEC championship. And yet he didn't change. He said, we're still going to be physical. We're still going to be tough. We're still going to harp on the same things. And they went out and that time beat Alabama, being the same team. They didn't deviate from that.
Well, and that's what I remember talking to Mario Cristobal about this, who worked with Kirby at Alabama and worked with Nick Saban in Alabama. And obviously he's not had the greatest first year at Miami. Yeah. But when he was at Oregon winning Pac-12 titles is when we had this conversation. And he said, because I had just watched one of the practices and I was like, it was a bye week. I was like, man, you guys are getting after it for a bye week. He's like, and they all had their own vernacular for this. He's like, oh, it's the Tuesday mentality. And basically they want every day to feel like Tuesday. And so you never encounter something in a game that feels too extreme, where you say, I'm not prepared for this.
And you don't have to make a choice. I think the people thought that there is a choice between the modern college football, where you're throwing the ball around and you're a pass first offense, air raid, versus being the tough slobber knocker.
Yeah.
Alabama was the first team under Saban to show, no, you don't have to make that choice. Like they went to not necessarily air raid, but Lane Kiffin brought them into the 21st century. That principle,
those different
but
principles,
they were still tough and they were still physical. And Kirby figured that out. We just got done talking to Todd Monken. He was 27 minutes of gold, Jerry, gold. But he talked about how Kirby on the front end, basically when he was interviewing there. And again, this was Kirby Smart with the reputation.
This was Kirby Smart when we were saying you'll never figure it out offensively. Yeah.
Post 2019, they've been run out of the building by Joe Burrow and company, and Joe Brady and LSU are going to revolutionize college football and blah, blah, blah. And Kirby Smart, despite being just 43 years old at that point, is a dinosaur. Kirby Smart talks to Todd Monken, and as Todd was telling us now, he said, "Look, I want to modernize on offense. I want this offense to be more aggressive, and I'm going to let you do that." And Todd Monken's about to finish his 3rd year at Georgia, having done that, and he's going to presumably go into his 4th year at Georgia doing that. And Kirby Smart realized he did not have to make a choice between modernizing the offense and going more pass happy and giving up bloody Tuesdays and physicality.
Well, and it's interesting because in the NFL, they don't have that for the most part.
Because they're in the week.
But they don't need that.
Yeah.
Because all NFL players are motivated by the fact that they might get cut.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a different, and they're done this for so long and they're used to it. In college, it's not like that. You have to hit, you have to be prepared to hit and be kind of not desensitized to it. I think Cedric Van Pren, the center, put it very well. You build up calluses essentially.
Yeah.
And so that you're not surprised, like Ohio State is, when you get in the 3rd quarter against Michigan or the 4th quarter against Michigan, and they're still coming, because that's how Michigan practices, by the way. And that's what, Ohio State, it was interesting talking to their players. Jack Sawyer, one of their D linemen, said, we were physical against Michigan. We played well. We had some busts in the run game. And then you talk to Cedric Van Pren, who watched the same film and said exactly the same thing. He goes, they were very physical against Michigan. There were some things that got out of hand on a couple of plays, but this is a physical team. Although I'm not sure we're going to see that, because that's what Ohio State has to prove. And Ryan Day said they got back to more physical practices when they had the time off and they could heal their bodies. And maybe that's what they need, because if they're a little more used to that, and they are athletically very similar to Georgia's level, that might be the key to a good competitive game.
I really don't know, honestly, what to expect. I mean, an Ohio State rout of Georgia is the last thing I expect.
No,
but
a close game wouldn't shock me at all, and an Ohio State win wouldn't shock me at all.
Yeah, that's what the Ohio State writers have been asking. Does Ohio State have a chance here, or do you think Georgia's going to win these? No. Ohio State has a chance because of talent was what we talked about, but they have the wide receivers that, I mean, what have people said in the offseason? What did the Alabama fans say? That if they hadn't lost Mechie and Williams,
right?
And I'm not sure that's true. I'm not endorsing that, but that would have been interesting.
Harrison, Ibuka, and Fleming,
right?
Pretty damn good. Now, if they had Jackson Smith and Jigba, that would help quite a bit, but they haven't had him all season.
I don't know that Ohio State can run the ball. Nobody can run the ball in Georgia. Nobody has in the last 4 years. I'm not sure Ohio State needs to run the ball. They can pass the ball that effectively. I think I was talking with Cameron about this, and I know it's simplistic. This isn't baseball. Field position plays a role, but let's say I think Ohio State offensively, over under, they can get about 24 points, 24, 27 points, about 400 yards, 5 yards of play. The question is on the other side of the ball. Is Georgia's offense going to so overwhelm?
Right. Ohio
because
State's
the more I look at those matchups, the more I talk with Cameron,
it's tough.
It plays well into Georgia's hand. Where's Ohio State best? Defensive ends. Where's Georgia's O-line best? Tackles. They've got those tight ends, but the thing that people aren't talking about, Andy, is as much as, and the tight ends are legit, but the tight ends are a storyline because it's different. I think Ladd McConkey's going to play for Georgia, but even if he didn't, they're getting A.D. Mitchell back. Like Todd Monken said, he's had a good week.
He made a pretty big catch in the national championship game last year, didn't he?
And he looked against Oregon to start this year like he was going to be a breakout guy. George Pickens said he's my heir apparent as he's the outside receiver.
Right.
He is the outside receiver
George
guy.
Pickens, by the way, was never healthy enough to really make a huge impact.
Mitchell did play in the SEC championship, but didn't catch a pass. He did throw a 2-point conversion pass to Darnell Washington. So Georgia's getting healthier on the outside, which I think is going to open up the inside. And we don't even talk about the running game and the blocking. And
see, that's the part where I think Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers make the biggest difference. Forget the fact that Brock Bowers is their leading receiver, that Darnell Washington is actually going to catch more passes on his NFL team than he does at Georgia, because Brock Bowers won't be on his team.
Yeah, presumably.
But the rest of the NFL should pray that they're not
in 2023.
But Darnell Washington is devastating in the run game.
Yes.
As an extra blocker. Because like Georgia's offensive linemen were really funny talking about meeting him at the All-American game in high school and going, "You're a tackle, right?" And he's like, "Nah, I'm a tight end." And then they see him like catching one-handed, and it's like, wow. And then Bowers, for as good of a skill player as he is, because let's be honest, he might be Georgia's best running back if that's what they told him to play. He can block really well too.
Yeah. And I've seen this out of Georgia over the last few years. Like they've been tight end U for a little bit, and they're recruiting that way, and they're not going to change, by the way. Like Darnell Washington, unless he's getting bad advice, is going to turn pro. But they're going to slide in Oscar Delp into his role. They signed 2 tight ends already.
Yeah.
And they're going for a third.
Right.
Bruce Robinson is a 5-star. So that's that. But to relate it back again to this game, they're not dependent on the tight ends. They've got the outside receivers. They've got slot receivers. Lad McConkey, even if he's 75%,
right. That just happens to be what they're.
And they've got running backs. Yeah. They're getting healthier there. Kendall Milton hasn't been healthy much over the last half of the season, but he played in the SEC championship. He can get more carries. They got Kenny McIntosh, Dajon Edwards. They've got a lot on offense. Now, I think that gets back to, I think your friend Cole Kubulik made a point that he basically said that he think Georgia rolls if Stetson doesn't have a really bad game.
A lot of mistakes.
Which is possible.
Yeah.
He is still Stetson Bennett gunslinger.
Yeah.
And that over the last year and a half has been what Georgia needed, but
here's the game that I think might be informative here. And this is, I don't want to make it sound like I think Georgia's going to roll over Ohio State, because I don't. I think Ohio State has a chance in this game. But the game that is informative to me is the Tennessee game, where they were playing Hendon Hooker, who's a much better runner than C.J. Stroud, a much better improviser than C.J. Stroud, and basically said, we're going to keep everything in the pass game in front of us, and we're going to heat up Hendon Hooker. Because Georgia had not been a huge pressure team to that point, but they really tried to get after Hendon Hooker.
They put Jalen Carter, and not just Jalen Carter, Nazir Stackhouse could push the pocket up.
Yep.
They had blitzes from the outside, and they told their cornerbacks and safeties, you're going to be on an island.
Yeah.
Go man
and make a tackle.
They trusted them. And that's what Kirby Smart wants to do. Kirby Smart wants to play man-to-man when he can. So
which he, by the way, that goes back to the Rose Bowl against Oklahoma.
Yeah.
When he was playing zone that first half and Baker Mayfield picked him apart, and he goes to his corners at halftime, and he's like, listen, we're going to put you out there and you're going to have to make it.
Schematically, we could go back and forth as to whether Georgia is going to do that again, because they zig when they expect them to zag a lot of times.
Yeah.
They change, like they may be looking at Ohio State and saying Ohio State thinks that we're going to do that, so we're going to play.
I will say, if you've watched C.J. Stroud against teams with anywhere close to comparable talent, you can get pressure on him, and he does not respond well to it.
Yes. So they will probably, but they also probably think they can get that pressure without blitzing very much.
Right. And they're an odd front team, so you don't have to. If you bring in the fourth from different places every play, you don't have to bring 5.
That Tennessee game, though, in a macro sense, not in an X's and O's sense, was such an emotion thing for Georgia. Like, there was in Georgia's building, there was all this hype about Tennessee. And I think they really did play like, we're going to show people that.
And see, that's where I think Ohio State has an advantage here, because none of these guys have felt like the underdog since the moment they set foot on campus. And now they are.
I keep waiting for the complacency to kick in for Georgia. It almost did against Missouri.
Yeah.
But
this is not a team you're going to be complacent against.
They got up for They got up for Oregon. They got up for Tennessee. They got up for the LSU and the SEC championship. So much of that was about, and to get it back to this existential crisis we thought that the Georgia program may have of, we finally kicked the football. So what does Charlie Brown do
pull
now?
It away, yeah.
And yet here they are, 13-0. Their motivation inwardly for the SEC championship was, well, we didn't win the SEC championship last year. We get to do something last year's team didn't do. Is there just enough complacency that it could bite him in the ass? I can say because Todd Monken said that and the S word over and over in his 27 minutes.
Here's the thing, having been around enough Nick Saban teams and now Kirby Smart teams, I don't think complacency is something you worry about with those programs when they're playing somebody good, because they tend to try to measure against themselves, but
Mhm.
it's human nature when you're playing somebody who's supposed to be as good as you
Mhm.
to go, we'll show you.
Isn't that helped by recruiting too? Because we think we look at so much in terms of how we're viewing it from the outside, but on the inside, these players are still competing with the guy behind them.
They're also competing with some of these guys for draft spots.
Right. They're competing. They're like Kenny McIntosh, who we just talked to. He's not complacent, probably, because he wants more carries.
Yeah.
And he wants to do well so that they don't give more carries to Kendall Milton and Dijon Edwards.
Georgia's offensive tackles, maybe looking at this, Paris Johnson's probably the first tackle off the board in the draft next year. And they're probably sitting there going, well, let's play better than him.
Yeah.
And so there is motivation there.
Jalen Carter's probably playing to piss off.
But also the 5 NFL offensive linemen at Ohio State are probably like, we're going to show the world what we can do against Jalen Carter.
I just wonder whether when this is over, and I'm not endorsing that this is going to happen, but that building that you can't see that I'm pointing at, this is Georgia's 3rd time in the building.
Mm-hmm.
They are 13-0. They don't this time in their semifinal game. They're not coming off a loss. They have Stetson got to go to the Heisman ceremony. He finally has respect. Do we on Sunday morning look back and say, Georgia let its foot off the pedal just enough, and the most talented team other than them out there made them pay for it?
That's what's interesting to me, because you've got Ohio State feeling like underdogs, having a real chip on. They don't have to manufacture it this time. And then Georgia, but I think that's going to be the motivation for Georgia is these guys are supposed to be as good as us.
Mm-hmm. That's why
let's show everybody what it really means.
It might have been more dangerous if it was a team like Michigan, who doesn't get your attention as much. Now, I think
Michigan would have Georgia's attention pretty well right now.
Yeah, well, but because it's Ohio State, that probably gets Georgia's attention and be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, you're going to come out in warm-ups and look at across the field and go, they look like us.
Yeah,
and Georgia doesn't experience that very often.
No, and I don't think they experienced that against Tennessee, for instance. I mean,
their
quarterback and receivers are really good,
LSU,
but they didn't have
yeah.
And it's an instant respect factor. But how much of that, like, did they need that motivation over the course of the last few weeks in practice and everything? I mean, it's an interesting thing. I would pick Georgia. I don't go into this like I did. I kind of go into it the way I did the Tennessee game, where I expected Georgia to win, but I wouldn't have been surprised with any result. Whereas against Oregon, I fully expected Georgia to win. Against LSU, I fully expected them to win.
And that's what makes this game so intriguing, because on the right day, Ohio State can play with these guys, and that's going to be
– and it will not be
crazy if it happens.
It will not be an existential crisis for the Georgia program if it loses. It will be for Ohio State, which I guess would be a good way to wrap up this segment.
And when we come back, Cameron Teague talking Buckeyes. You're going to make some resolutions this week, and one of those, I guarantee it, is going to be you're going to work out more and you're going to stick to it. But it's hard to stick to. I know that. It was very hard for me until about 2 years ago when I joined the Peloton family. And now I feel like I'm working out with my friends and they're pushing me through this. I don't know Andy Spear or Adrian Williams or Selena Samuela, but it feels like they know me. And it feels like they know how to push my buttons and make sure that I am working as hard as I can to be the best, most fit person I can be. And here's the thing. You're probably thinking, Peloton, that's the bike thing. Well, I don't do the bike very often. I like the treadmill. I like the boot camp classes. I like the weights. I like the yoga. I've done the boxing. They've got something for everybody. You can mix it up. They've got great music. The personalities of the trainers will help you kind of figure out, oh, I like this person. This person works for me. And it'll make you excited to open that app and say, oh, they got something new for me. This is going to be awesome. I'm telling you, you'll be able to stick to it this time. So try Peloton risk-free with a 30-day home trial. It's for new members only. It's not available in remote locations. You can see additional terms at onepeloton.com/home-trial. But give it a try. I'm telling you right now, it'll be the easiest resolution you ever kept. Sling TV has something for everyone. All your favorite shows on your favorite channels, all right at your fingertips. What you watch is up to you. It really just depends on what kind of mood you're in. So if you're looking for sports, Sling's got you covered with pro and college football and basketball, baseball, hockey, soccer, golf, racing, and so much more. Sling also has reality TV, so you can keep up with the latest gossip with today's hottest shows on channels like TLC, Bravo, MTV, and more. And don't forget about news. Get up to date with today's most trusted sources like MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. Feeling adventurous? Explore thousands of movies and shows on demand. So what kind of mood are you in? No matter your answer, Sling has what you need. Getting Sling is easy. Sign up and start watching in just 5 minutes. You can stream on any device, and you can record up to 50 hours with your included DVR space. And the best part, you can pause or customize your subscription at any time. So check out sling.com for special offers. Sling, the TV you love for a price you'll love. Try it today. Henson Shaving is a family-owned aerospace parts manufacturer that has made parts for the International Space Station and the Mars rover. Well, now they're bringing that precision engineering to your shaving experience. If you're watching on the video feed right now, here is a Henson Shaving razor. It looks decidedly old school, but as you just learned, it has some high-tech stuff in there. Razor blades are like diving boards. The longer the board, the more the wobble. The more wobble, the more nicks, cuts, and scrapes. A bad shave isn't a blade problem. It's an extension problem. But by using aerospace-grade CNC machines, Henson makes metal razors that extend just 0.0013 inches, which is less than the thickness of a human hair. That means it's a secure and stable blade with a vibration-free shave. And they're exactly right. Seriously, Henson Shaving wants the best razor, not the best razor business. That means no plastic, no subscriptions, no proprietary blades, and no planned obsolescence. The Henson razor works with standard dual-edge blades to give you that old-school shave with the benefits of new-school tech. Once you own a Henson razor, it's only about $3 to $5 per year to replace the blades. It's time to say no to subscriptions and yes to a razor that will last you a lifetime. Visit hensonshaving.com/Andy to pick the razor for you and use the code Andy, and you'll get 2 years worth of blades free with your razor. Just make sure to add them to your cart. It's 100 free blades when you head to hensonshaving.com. That's hensonshaving.com/Andy and use the code Andy. That's hensonshaving.com/Andy. Joined now by Cameron Teague, the Athletics Ohio State beat writer, and Cameron got to see Ohio State practice, or well, stretching in one period of practice.
Riveting stuff.
Hey, listen, they keep that stuff locked down in Columbus, so you got to see more than usual. But this is a really interesting game for the Buckeyes, and we talked to defensive players today, and Jim Knowles and Jack Sawyer. I thought was interesting, talking about how pissed off they are about what happened against Michigan, how badly they want to get back on the field, and it actually kind of reminded me of Georgia going into the playoff last year against Michigan, having been blown out by Alabama in the SEC championship game.
Right. Yeah. No, they've talked a lot about that. I think Ryan Day referenced that the day they found out they got in. It was like, this is possible. Georgia did it last year. And even Emeka Egbuka, the receiver, talked about it a little bit yesterday, saying, we don't want to be Georgia. We don't want to try to emulate Georgia.
Right.
But they set the precedent. We know we can.
Yeah, they showed you can turn around after a bad performance. And that's the thing that I guess Ohio State needs to show us. And I guess part of it's a function of the schedule, where they rarely play teams that are their equal physically. And so when they do play a team that can play with them and that team beats them, it's like, oh God, the world's ending.
Yeah.
And you really want to know, was this 2 bad quarters, or is this who they are?
Yeah. No, and that's the thing. It's always the team at the end of the year. It's always that game at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And then you win or lose. If you lose it, it's like you have to wait 365 more days to play a team that's your equal again.
Yeah.
Know? So I think you look at it, there's 2 ways to look at it. I think they did have a really bad half. I thought those big plays just kind of came off some. I mean, Cameron Brown has to make that tackle on a hitch on 3rd down. I mean, Latham Ransom has to play action a little bit better. But there's still things with personnel that just show that, like, they are this close away from being blown out against teams like this, or staying in games like that.
Well, and it was interesting because the Ohio State players all talked about the big plays on the ground in the second half against Michigan. And the Georgia players mentioned that too, and said it looked like they were fairly sound mostly. This is Georgia players saying this. Now, a lot of it maybe just kind of gassing them up.
Yeah.
But I am curious, because watching that game live, it felt to me like if, let's say, Donovan Edwards doesn't go for those 2 long touchdowns, that just would wind up being 5 and 6 yards of carry down the field until they scored instead of the big long play, because it felt like the dam had broken on Ohio State's defense at that point. But maybe not. Maybe this is different. And that's the part that I'm fascinated by is, can this defense be more physical? Can they be more gap sound? Can they play their assignments better?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is just I thought at that point in the fourth quarter they were just trying to do anything to stop the run, and then people got out of gaps, and it was just blown everywhere. I thought that first half they did a really good job of stopping the run, and then Michigan, I feel like, kind of wore them down in that third quarter on that really long touchdown drive.
Which, by the way, Georgia will try to do too.
And when they have 3-4 running backs, they can do it with.
Yeah, as I've been saying on the pod for the last 3 weeks, Georgia is just supercharged Michigan.
Yeah,
and that's the part with Ohio State that you kind of prove it's not a cultural thing, and that's kind of where Ryan Day is right now. I feel like at 2 straight losses to Michigan, he can erase it all within 2 weeks, or by this time Sunday, it can be a complete existential crisis. Yes.
Yeah. It hasn't been a good month already for Ohio State. And if you go in and get blown out by Georgia, it's going to be the longest offseason that Ryan Day will ever have.
Yeah. It's just horrendous. And you do have to kind of question where you are. I did a lot of asking of Georgia players about what they do during the week. I asked Ohio State. I asked Jack Sawyer. I was like, how often do you guys do inside drill, which is some people call it middle drill. It's basically inside 7 on. You have your 7-on-7 that everybody knows, where you play it with the quarterback and the receivers. There's also inside 7-on-7, which is a lot less fun to watch. Yeah. Lots of fun to participate in as a lineman, because it is just the offensive line, defensive line, and linebackers. And there's like a quarterback and a running back, and it's not a quarterback who's expected to throw. Yeah. And you just pound on each other for like 15 minutes. And, Jack Sawyer said they do that maybe once a week during the season, but it sounds like sometimes not. Georgia does it like every Tuesday and Wednesday. And that's part of their culture.
I was going to say, it's why they are who they are. Now, Ohio State is tackling more this year than they did in the past.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between tackling and running that type of drill over and over and over again.
Well, and listen, athletically, Ohio State and Georgia are not that different. I think that's – people may have this assumption because Georgia's favored, or because of the way Ohio State lost to Michigan, that somehow Georgia is that far physically superior. They are not. Yeah. I mean, athletically, these teams are very similar.
Yeah, and I think I was talking to Seth, our Georgia writer, trying to think Ohio State may have the most talented skill position guys of all the semifinal teams.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So
they're definitely more talented than any that Georgia's seen this year.
Right. Yeah. So the skill gap, the athletic, the talent gap is not huge in this game.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see Marvin Harrison Jr. against Georgia's corners. Like Keely Ringo, we remember him for the big play in the national championship game where he picks off that pass and returns it for a touchdown. Well, his coaches were telling him to get down, by the way. But I watched that. I was at the coaches convention, so I'm in a bar with 300 drunk coaches all screaming, "Get down, get down!" But Keely is a gambler. It reminds me a little bit of, if you watch the NFL, Trevon Diggs for the Cowboys, where you get the big play one way and the big play the other way. Yeah. And when you got to play against Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Buka, Julian Fleming, like that can happen.
Any mistake can be a touchdown.
Yes.
Because they're so gifted and they're so fast. It's just so much speed out there.
Let's talk about CJ Stroud, because as a thrower of the football, there might not be a better pure thrower of the football in the country this year. But I go back to Penn State, where there were plays where somebody might be coming off the edge and it didn't even look like he saw him. Yeah. And then Michigan, where it felt like they got more pressure up the middle, because that's where they were the strong, Mozzie Smith and Mikey Morris coming up the middle. This is going to be one of those teams that can push them up the middle.
Yeah. CJ's going to have to be he's going to have to be the most poised he's been all year.
Yeah.
I mean, Ohio State has talent off the line, but it's mainly their tackles.
Yeah. Paris Johnson, probably a top 10 pick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And DeJuan Jones, I think, is a guy who could be in the NFL next year. But CJ, sometimes when he gets pressure, he falls back more. He doesn't kind of move left to right. He can't reset his feet sometimes. So he's going to have to be poised and make the right reads against this team, because they're going to get pressure. It's going to get there later.
That's what blows my mind about this game. You've got a potential first-round quarterback, and he's not the mobile one. Yeah. He's not the one that can escape. Like, I try. If Ohio State gets pressure, I have no concern about Stetson Bennett finding his way out of it every once in a while and making a play. I worry about CJ Stroud finding a way to do that.
And I agree. I think part of that has been Ryan Day being like, hey, listen, don't scramble as much. If you get hurt, we can't do anything after you. I think Ryan Day is going to have to take the handcuffs off CJ and say, go play your game, go win us this game. He has to trust his Heisman finalist type quarterback.
We've seen that when he's had to do something. Like when they couldn't run the ball really against Northwestern, you couldn't throw the ball at all that day. He ran it well and did some stuff that I remember watching that game and going, oh, I didn't even know he had that in his game.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. I like the idea of just let him rip.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that was my biggest critique of the Michigan game. I think it was that 4th and 5 or 4th and 3 where he decided to go for a fake punt instead of go for it.
Yeah.
In my mind, you have all this talent on the offensive side of the ball. Let your offense go get the first down instead of trying to fake punt.
Kirby Smart will tell you calling a fake punt in a key situation like that never goes well, and people don't forget it until you win a national title.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Yeah, it's tough, but the Ohio State run game is interesting to me because I obviously know Trey Henderson, but Mayan Williams may be back.
Yeah, he wasn't at practice today, or at least the media portion.
What you saw, but that's the other part of this is they're going to have to be able to move the ball on the ground a little bit. And it doesn't have to be dominant, but they have to have some semblance of balance to keep Georgia from selling out to kill CJ Stroud.
Yeah, exactly. They can't get behind the stakes.
Yeah.
I mean, whether penalties or getting loss of yards on 1st and 10, like they have to be able to move Georgia's defensive front a little bit on the ground.
Yeah, and that's the part I'm curious to see. And what's the sense in Columbus about this game from just fans, people within the program? How are they approaching this?
I think a lot of it is, I mean, you almost, I don't want to say happy to be here because Ohio State expects to be here.
Right.
After that Michigan loss, I think Ryan Day said it's just a second lease on life. I think that's how the fans feel too. Like you have another chance. This is where you wanted to be. In all honesty, you probably thought this would be the national championship game at the beginning of the year. So if you want to win national championship, you were going to have to go through Georgia sooner or later. So it might as well be now.
It's interesting watching the criticism of Ryan Day and then watching the reaction to the criticism of Ryan Day, because it feels like most people outside of the Ohio State fan base are like, what are you talking about? This guy's been awesome. But I kind of understand, having grown up in SEC country, having covered a lot of big SEC programs, like that is how it operates at that type of place. When you recruit the best players, when you expect to win national titles, you're kind of playing to your own standard. And it feels like, I guess maybe people don't understand what the standard is at Ohio State, that it is national titles.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then you add on the fact you haven't won a Big Ten championship in 2 years. So you lost to your rival 2 years in a row. This is not about just getting to the college football playoff or just sometimes win a Big Ten championship. This is about doing it every single year.
Yeah. And that's the part I think is so interesting about this, because they can't just be happy to be here because you're Ohio State. You're supposed to be able to play with Georgia.
Yeah.
Like you're supposed to be able to play with Alabama.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be able to play with USC or whoever it is that is supposed to be the team to beat. And that's where they just have not been able to do that lately. And I think back to before you were on the beat, when they went to the Fiesta Bowl and played Clemson in Ryan Day's first year, that defense was nasty. That team was loaded. Yeah. And they lost to Clemson in that game. That was a great Clemson team too. I think if it had been any other year, except for the one with the Joe Burrow LSU team, either one of those teams could have won the national title. But Ohio State has not felt the same since then.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you speak on that defense. I think they have young guys on this defense who a lot of people are going to learn about today. On Saturday.
Yeah. Who could be that. Well,
like,
JT
is he's a stud. I mean, you're missing everybody thinks Chase Young. JT is that type of guy.
Yeah. Well, you kind of wonder who the next great one was going to be, because I always joke that there's some factory where they press out 6'6", 260-pound defensive ends. Yeah. JT's actually not as much in that mold of Chase Young or a Bosa brother. Like Zach Harrison looks like that, but he doesn't necessarily play as much like that.
Yeah, JT is more of an athletic type. I mean, that Penn State game was just shocking.
He was all over the field.
Yeah. So that's the type of guy he can be. Jack Sawyer is a guy who, when he gets going, he can be that type of guy. And then he haven't even touched, but Mike Hall
Yep.
inside is the type of guy who can take over a game. So they have guys, they're young. I think this is their chance to kind of make it.
Well, and I think about like a Lathan Ransom. You go back
Yeah.
to the Maryland game where he was doing everything. You know, if he has a game like that, because Stetson Bennett, as Seth mentioned earlier on the show, he can be a gunslinger at times. He can throw the ball into trouble. And if Ohio State can make him pay for that, it's a very different game.
Yeah. They have to. I think the key for Jim Knowles, and I think I'm going to write about this week, is just they talk a lot about aggression, but it has to be controlled aggression.
Yeah.
You can't just go after Stetson all the time because he picks it up. He's going to pick you apart. You have to kind of confuse him. And that's what Jim Knowles is good at. That's what he's been good at all year, is confusing quarterbacks with different coverages. And I think they can have some success with that.
And I think getting back to what we were talking about at the beginning, how do they hold up in the third quarter when Georgia's just trying to have the 9 or the 16 play 80-yard drive, which they may not try that. I mean, that's the one of the things about Georgia's offense that I think people get a little twisted is, yes, they do have a tight end who leads them in receiving, but they also have some athletes on the outside who can take the top off of defense. And that's a scary thing for Ohio State when you look at what Cornelius Johnson did in the Michigan game.
Yeah. And I mean, and then you look at the Maryland game. Maryland picked them apart over the top. So no, that is scary. If they pay too much attention to those tight ends, they could get beat on the outside by Georgia's receivers.
Hard not to pay attention to those tight ends. They're massive. Good Lord.
God.
Yeah. Darnell Washington looks like he was created in a lab.
He looks the biggest person on the field, even just on film.
Oh yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Now Brock Bowers doesn't look like that, but then you see him get the ball on an end around and you're like, wait a second, he's faster than all DBs. How's that possible?
Yeah. And I think he's really smart too. He knows angles really well. He knows how to get around everybody. So that's the hardest thing. You try to stop those two, and then you have a run game with Georgia, and then you have Stetson Bennett passing down. They're really tough to stop.
I love talking about this though, because you think about the level of athlete that we're going to see. This is what you want in the playoff. This is when the playoff was created. It was to get games like this and put teams together like this that, maybe Ohio State didn't, in the BCS, they would not have been playing for the national title, would not have a chance.
Right. Yeah.
They have a blemish, but I wanted to see the 2015 Ohio State team get to play the 2015 Alabama team. It never happened.
Yeah.
We're getting to see this group of athletes play Georgia's group of athletes. And I think that's very exciting.
Yeah. And it's the craziest thing, like you said, this was what we thought would be the national championship game.
Yeah.
And you thought you might not get it at all. And now you're getting a chance to see it. And I think this is the most exciting of the two games to me. I think it's going to be a heck of a game to watch.
This is the most excited I've been for a CFP game in quite some time. Maybe since that Clemson Ohio State Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah.
I think that was the last one I felt like, oh man, this could be great. Alabama, Georgia last year in the national title game. It was one of those where you thought Georgia was going to come back and round back into form, especially after seeing against Michigan. This one, I'm assuming Georgia can win it and will win it, but there's no reason Ohio State can't win this game.
To me, I just don't know what Ohio State team shows up.
That's
the biggest question.
The big question.
And just, if they're on their game, I think this could be a really fun game to watch.
Well, and Ryan Day, you better hope that the one that shows up plays a lot like the Georgia team that shows up, because if this is a blowout,
it's gonna be bad.
You are going to have a long offseason. So
long time.
We can't wait. We'll talk to you again soon. I will give you my pick for this game with Ari and Nicole on Friday's show, and then it's on. Ari and I are back after the games. Ari's at the Fiesta Bowl. I'm at the Peach Bowl. We'll break it all down. Thanks so much for listening.